to the YouTube audience. There's always something. This is a good indication how I still get nervous being in charge of organizing this in front of all of you.
I'll keep an eye on the YouTube, Eduardo.
Okay, I'm pausing to hear from you confirmation that we're being live. I think we are, right? Are we live?
Just one moment.
Are we okay? Are we live? Yes. Thank you so much, Adriana.
Yes, we are.
So with that, I really want to welcome Martin. And I think that from now, he will be talking for the first hour as usual. And we're going to have questions and answers only until 12:45, not 1 p.m. as we normally do, because he has to go teaching. So welcome you all. Welcome you, Martin. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing with us your wonderful research. You can take it from here.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I tried to share my screen now. Obviously, you made me nervous as well. So let's see how that goes. Can you see a bonobo?
You're okay.
Great.
The video is good. And we hear you well.
Good. Let's quickly do one thing here. Okay, thank you very much, Eduardo. Thank you everybody for having me. It's obviously a great honor to speak to all of you. I think where would I like to start? Let's see where that goes. Okay, here. So somehow we like to think of us, as a peaceful species, a species corrupted somehow in modern days by land properties or maybe technology. And this idea is depicted on this painting here that we see by Gauguin. And the idea goes back to the one from a Swiss philosopher of the 18th century, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, in search of our noble ancestry, several human hunter-gatherer groups were romanticized, including also here these Pacific Islanders on these paintings. And in the end, however, it turned out that much of their peace-loving and egalitarian attitudes were rather missed. So aggression in humans has several phases. Men respond violently to a challenge or to insult. In many cultures, they use aggression to sexually coerce women, and they fight during wars against other groups. Now, in order to reconstruct the evolutionary origins of the aggressive nature of our species, a closely related species became particularly instrumental, the chimpanzees. And by comparing humans now to chimpanzees, we can trace back the origins of many, shared aggressive traits, including the occurrence of sexual violence and warfare at least 7 to 13 million years ago, where the two lines separated. By the use of the chimpanzee model, also we can gain insights into how sexual and natural selection potentially favored the use of these types of, let's face it, mainly male aggression in our evolutionary past. Now, however, while humans share with chimpanzee many aggressive traits, the variation observed in humans is much larger. Unlike chimpanzees, intergroup relationships, they can be very tolerant, allowing for cooperation across boundaries, a trait whose evolutionary origin is very hard to reconstruct by the use of the chimpanzee model. Furthermore, for a reconstruction of the evolution of human traits that maybe have been associated with a reduction of aggression, such as a more equal distribution of paternities across the males and the strong long-term bonds between men and women, for that, the chimpanzee model also seems very restricted. So to learn more about the evolution and the implication of tolerance between groups and the reconstruction of aggression, we might need to extend our scope. And actually, we have another closest living relative, right? The bonobos, which split from the line leading to modern chimpanzees about 2 million years ago. And make also part of the genus Pan together with the chimpanzees. So who are those guys? Bonobos, they overall have been far less studied than chimpanzees. And much of our knowledge is based on either captive studies and single social groups in the wild. And this likely depends on the fact that they occur only in very remote parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And bonobos, they live like chimpanzees in social groups composed of several males and several females. And if I might very briefly contrast them here with chimpanzees in a traditional and very likely also over-romanticized view, I think on the chimpanzee you have on the left and on the right you have a bonobo face, and I think three differences would definitely stick out, and one of them, you know, in the narrative, and one of them being kind of we have very high levels of within group aggression in chimpanzees and potentially lower levels in bonobos. They're more peaceful. Then we would kind of hear, you know, that male lethal killing and permanent hostility between groups has been found in chimpanzees, and we kind of see something like intergroup tolerance potentially in bonobos, even though we know very little from the wild. And also one other trait is kind of that chimpanzees are male dominated and female are dominant in bonobos. And given, as I said, you know, that this traditional view was mainly based on captive studies and with very little strong supporting evidence from the wild, this basically became, broadly speaking, my research agenda. And today I kind of would talk mainly about would like to talk mainly about the first two aspects, or touch on the first two aspects. So coming back to our evolutionary framework. So given, you know, the supposedly less aggressive nature of bonobos, their incorporation in a broader picture seems rather promising. No, we can compare the two species, and we might be able to characterize, no, a potential ancestral variation a little bit better. No, if we compare these two species on aggressive or tolerant traits of interest, and you know, with that, so even maybe or better to reconstruct a common ancestor who might have looked like this one here. And you might think like I should better speak to myself, and you know, that maybe applies for my family tree. I guess we all know that, you know, something like that applies to all of us. Anyway, so I think that with, you know, a more integrative and a more balanced picture of a, you know, what I used to call a pancestor, certain human traits might appear less derived as inferred by the use of only the chimpanzee model. And the second part, you know, by investigating underlying causes and implications of the variation in behavior that we observe between the two species of the genus Pan, we also can make better inference about potential selective pressures, you know, shaping one or similar traits in humans. So in this case, you know, both species together somehow provide a better referential model than a single species by itself. So this is kind of just, you know, the very broad narrative of my studies now, particularly given I'm at the Human Evolutionary Biology department here at Harvard. So it all has to have a little bit of human touch. Anyway, so let me start talking about traits that are linked to aggression, and I will focus initially on male aggression, as it's way more frequent in both species. You know, generally speaking, mammalian males compete with each other over the access to fertile females, and the use of aggression in this competition is influenced by the potential to monopolize access to fertile females. Now, the better the access to females can be monopolized, the more males invest into attributes that are helpful during aggressive contests. And the monopolization potential of fertile females depends mainly, you know, on their distribution in time and space. Now, it is about females, so let's start talking about the females in the species of the genus Pan. Again, you will see on the right the bonobo picture, on the left the chimpanzees, and in the middle is kind of what applies to both. So females of both species, they live in social groups which are associated with several males. These groups we refer to as communities. In both species, unlike most of other mammals, mostly the females disperse out of their, or only females disperse out of their natal groups. And furthermore, both societies are characterized by fission-fusion dynamic. I saw in your program, I think in 2 days, two events from now, you will have another talk about fission-fusion societies. But what it means here is kind of the members of a group, they don't hang out the whole time with each other, but they split into smaller units, which we call parties, that vary in size and composition. And we kind of assume, because of lower feeding competition among individuals in bonobos, female bonobos somehow have lower cost of association and therefore tend to be somehow in larger parties than chimpanzees. Now, both species, they do not have a strict mating season, and the females, they exhibit these sexual swellings that you see here at the rear end of a bonobo from Louis Cartal, from Uma. And these swellings, they kind of indicate the likelihood of ovulation. These swellings, they go up and down and reflect the menstrual cycle, with maximally tumescent swellings somehow being around the time of ovulation. Now, one apparent difference between the females is that because of the associations with male also seem to have higher feeding costs for female chimpanzees, their optical signal is more precise in indicating ovulation. So males, we assume, males don't associate so long with them, and we have a lower precision of this signal in bonobos. If we now look at the consequences for the male, that means that a bonobo male would have to defend the female for a much longer time period to achieve a similar likelihood to sire the offspring. So if we very briefly think in chimpanzees, a male, in order to achieve a likelihood of 50% to sire an offspring, he would have to mate guard a female for about 3 days. To achieve the same likelihood to sire the offspring of a given female for bonobos, that would be about 9 days. So just the costs are much lower. So the potential to monopolize females seem to be higher in chimpanzees than in bonobos. Now, is that, do we see, kind of see a reflection of that in the way that males compete? And one way to infer about the importance of aggression during mate competition is kind of to measure changes in testosterone levels. Testosterone, as you may know, is a hormone that increases muscle mass, but also the likelihood to behave aggressively. High levels of testosterone can also be costly because they suppress the immune function and increase the risk of injury. So we basically only expect to see an increase in testosterone when the potential reproductive benefit of aggression outweighs its costs. If we kind of compare the two species, we see on the left the chimpanzee, we see that in the presence of these maximally tumescent females, we see that males increase in their testosterone level, and we do indicating that aggressive competition among males seems to be really paying off in chimpanzees, whereas we do not see such an increase in bonobos, and that's kind of a finding that has now been replicated at 2 sites. And then the other thing is that males and chimpanzees do not only use aggression to compete with each other, but also use aggression against females to coerce them into matings. And we see that aggression received by males increases here on the left. We see the picture from a female side. The aggression rate received from male increases dramatically if they show these visual signs of fertility, the sexual swellings, whereas in bonobos, actually the opposite is the case. Males are not only less likely to aggress females when they're maximally tumescent, they even are more likely to lose conflicts against them during this time. So these findings on male behavior and hormone levels indicate that in bonobos, the strength of selection for traits that lead to success in direct contest competition, between males and in sexual coercions of females are reduced. Which I think also kind of means that somehow the potential for female choice is higher in bonobos. Now, why that might be interesting. And let me come back to this kind of, to this for human evolution. And because one idea is, one hypothesis that in the transition from a promiscuous ancestor with an uneven distribution of paternities to a species with a more equal distribution of paternities and these long-term pair bonds that we observe in humans, such a decrease in aggression and an increase in female choice was a very important step. Now, we can use the Penn model, right, to reconstruct, at least in this scenario, how a change in these factors, and decrease in male aggression, increase in female choice, basically affects the distribution of paternities or reproductive skew. And if a reduction of aggression and the increase in female choice would actually pave the way for evolution of pair bonding, we would expect a more even distribution of paternities and the lower reproductive skew among the males in bonobos. And so I kind of, to test that, I kind of at the first hand calculated from published data the reproductive skew over 7 years, where we had the corresponding data in bonobos. So we kind of, here you see for 5 different chimpanzee communities, we see on the y-axis the most successful sire share, and what you can see is, the larger the community is, the lower is the share of the most successful sire within these chimpanzee communities. So we can calculate that. We can calculate the 95 confidence intervals around these estimations. No comment, Eduardo. And then we can see, whether where the bonobos fall within that. And it was a very big surprise to us to see that the bonobo value is actually outside this 95% confidence interval, in that bonobos have a stronger reproductive skew than we would have expected if it would have been a chimpanzee community. And we kind of are currently trying to replicate that study by also including smaller chimpanzee community, because you can see, bonobos are rather on the small end of communities. And, there are some reasons to believe that in smaller communities, there is the dynamic changes between the males, allowing for more variation in reproductive skew. And here some, we kind of therefore included some very small chimpanzee communities from a neighboring group of the Kasekela group in Gombe and Bulindi, which is a very small group in a very fragmented forest part. We kind of also try to use now these multinomial index, which seem to be more robust towards variation in male size. And if we kind of have by now, compiled data from 4 different bonobo communities, it's clear bonobos fall within the range of chimpanzees. Some of the bonobo, there's overlap between the 2 species. However, we still have some bonobo communities that somehow seem to be outside the 95 confidence interval for chimpanzee communities. And to me, that somehow shows, that the bonobo social system has a potential, for a higher reproductive skew than we see in chimpanzees, but that does not always, we don't always see that. Now, what are the implications of this finding? I think one thing we can see clearly, is that first, a reduction in the importance of male aggression within groups due to a lower defensibility of the females, and the resulting increase in the potential for female choice is not resulting in more equal paternity distribution in the species of the genus Pan. And we can now, given this finding, it seems clear that in the transition from a mating system, in a transition from a more promiscuous mating system to one that we see now in humans, an increase in female choice was not enough to lower the skew among the males. And we kind of have to look for additional mechanisms that might have been important to reduce those skew, such as potential, incentives for females to sire offspring with lower ranking males. However, what I thought was interesting, coming back to the finding, that in many bonobo communities, most bonobo ladies seem to fall for the same guy, And here you see a picture of this chosen one in Louis Cotal, and that obviously raises now the question, what does he have that others don't have? Does he have particularly qualities? If we can look into the mouth, and you see this terrible dentation in this individual's mouth, and which makes it very clear, it doesn't seem to be his fighting abilities, or at least fighting abilities that make him the chosen one, or it also, is it the hairdo, or what the heck could it be? And just to share with you some observation in the field around mate competition, to get at that question, let me walk you through some scenarios in the bonobo world. So we have a kind of a situation. We have Uma, the female we just saw before, with a maximum tumescent swelling. Everybody is very attracted by her. Also Ben, a lower ranking male who would like to mate with her, but there is another male, in this case Jack, who is a higher ranking male who basically prevents him from accessing Uma. And what then on occasion can happen, that we have those females from outside who intervene in mate competition, which was in the beginning very puzzling, because I just didn't expect females to fight with males over access to other females during mate competition. And however, when we then did the genetic analysis, it became clear that those females that intervened were basically mothers of, in this case here was the mother of Ben. And she is around because we have here a male philopatric system, right, where the males remain in the natal community, so they kind of also, adult males can have their mothers around. So I wanted to know, whether those mothers actually have also some impact on the reproductive success, or first on the mating success, but then also on the reproductive success of those males. And so in a first step, I kind of compared a situation. We talked that they are in these small parties. So we compared a situation when males were in a party without their mom. And you can see here, the impact of male rank on the copulation frequency of these males, with high-ranking males having higher copulation frequency than low-ranking males, rather clear. Now, if we compare that to a situation in which the moms are actually together with the males in a party, we see that in the presence of their moms, particularly low and mid-ranking males, seem to have a higher mating success. So two things seem to matter, right, for males: high rank and the presence of mother. Now, the problem is that in bonobos, these two things are kind of not independent, and that it has been shown in other communities that male ranks depend also on the presence of the mom. Now, given that strong correlation, I just aim to see in a second step whether having an alive mother, actually influences the reproductive success of their sons, independent of the exact mechanism, right? Again, compiling chimpanzee data from published data, which include corresponding demographic information, we can see, how the likelihood of a given male to sire the offspring basically is, whether that's influenced or not by the presence of the mom in the community. And we do not see in chimpanzees that the likelihood increases of a male to sire offspring when his mom is present. When we look in bonobos, and here's also data from 4 different communities, we actually see that having a mom increases the likelihood of a male to sire offspring about 4 times. And now combining, the results here with what I showed you about the reproductive skew, that hints that some mothers, seem to be very good, in supporting their sons, because the mothers make a difference, and it's mainly similar sons who reproduce. So there seem to be some very powerful moms in these communities. And obviously mothers can have several sons. So maybe, and that's just a speculation at this point, certain mothers can be particularly successful. And to show you what I mean is kind of, so we would expect, if there's some particularly strong mothers, to have a stronger skew among paternal grandmothers than among males over a long time span. What do I mean by that? So I compiled, over 12-year data from Thai, and I just look at the reproductive skew or the percentage of offspring that can be attributed to the most successful individuals, here for a successful male. And then I look at paternal grandmothers, how many of those offspring, what is the most successful paternal grandmother within a community. And we see that in chimpanzees, these skews are kind of comparable. If we add now the bonobo values, it's only from one community where we have so far so much data. We see again, that the males, there is kind of more stronger skew among the males. And if we look at, how much offspring is kind of sired, has the same paternal grandmother, it's kind of 70% of all offspring conceived within that community over 12 years have the same paternal grandmother, which I think is crazy. And you can see that's only a single data point, but that just emphasizes, how strong of an influence these mothers have in the society. So, coming back, while the reproductive skew idea suggests that, that one male might be particularly attractive to females, it basically turns out it's not them. It might much more be their mom, So bluntly speaking, when we look here at the alpha male again, instead of a Ryan Gosling, we rather have something maybe like a Prince Charles. And, males appear to have more a background actor role instead, and instead of their quality, it's maybe more the one of their mom who finally matters. So I hope we don't have too many royalists here in the audience, and they're obviously very sorry that the queen died. Okay, so what are the implications of what we saw? So I think one implication is that there are large potential indirect fitness gains for older females through helping their sons. We don't know how active their role is, but females seem to still, their presence in the group allows them to have a large fraction of indirect fitness benefits. And, we can think of that as a potential mechanism for selection of post-reproductive lifespan. I think that is something, we start tentatively exploring, but, there are just some implications along that line. And also, it very seems to shape kind of female relationships. So my postdoc, my graduate student now really just went to the field, and she will look at how motherhood and how having a son influences the whole shaping of female relationships. And we look at, how these compare chimpanzees and bonobos in the ontogeny of the mother-son relationships. That is done by a postdoc, Rachna Reddy. Okay, so let me change now a little bit, and I would kind of use the second part of my talk to talk about territorial violence and intergroup relationships. And if we kind of, let's start here with chimpanzees. So this is kind of, somehow graphically depicted the chimpanzee situation. Social structure consists of separate group, which have constantly hostile intergroup relationships. Here it is represented by that symbol. Lethal aggression during between conflicts have been reported for all long-term chimpanzee sites, and it's, females can transfer between groups before they reach maturity. So that's kind of the chimpanzee situation. And we know in humans conflicts between residential groups that result in lethal violence also occur in human societies. However, we also see now interactions between members of different residential communities and exchange of ideas, goods, and services, which is very different from chimpanzees. And this is relevant for large-scale cooperation in our species, for cultural innovation, and for cumulative culture and the buildup of the multi-level societies we see in humans. Now, existing models of human evolution, of human intergroup relations, draw heavily on the chimpanzee model. No, they kind of, we try basically to explain how did we become, how could the social structure that we see in humans evolve from a chimpanzee structure. The chimpanzee structure reflecting the ancestral structure. And they emphasize, for example, the need for pair bonds and exogamy as crucial elements to facilitate cooperation between members of different groups. Now, this is all done without considering, the bonobo model, because it basically doesn't exist in that respect. And I would like to use the rest of my talk to introduce you to between group relationships in bonobos and to see whether there is maybe some reasons to believe that there is larger variation in ancestral intergroup relationships or not. And I would like to take you on a journey. I would, thanks to initial support from Christoph Bösch, it actually 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to set up a new bonobo field site. And what you see here is kind of a map of the Congo. Here is Kinshasa, and you have here the African map with the DRC. You have here the Congo River, which kind of forms the natural boundary between the chimpanzee range on the north of the river and on the south shore here. That's basically the only place where bonobos live. It's only within the Democratic Republic of Congo. We know a lot from Louis Cottal and from Bamba, two long-term field sites, which are very active scientifically, and Kokolopori is basically up here. Now, how do you get a field site started? So that's obviously not so straightforward, and I kind of would just, I think it's now time to have a drink or kind of just show you a little bit how that practically looked in setting up such a site in a very remote parts of Africa. Let me quickly look at here. So you have okay, so you have to be prepared to bring a lot of money because there's no bank on the side. On the left side, the preparation. These preparations also included the setup of a boat, which was about to take up for 2 weeks up the Moringa rivers to the side. You see the Congo River, this is in Mbandaka, and you see here, this is kind of the boat we built over the course of some days, which then we started. That kind of was in the beginning rather romantic journey on a very large river, till after 3 days one of the two outboarders kind of stopped working and it became all but slower, and it's just we got stuck a lot along the road up, but it was that's just the way how we traveled upriver. And by now the access changed a bit. We can use a flight closer, but at that point we just had to bring a lot of material, and we landed at the port where we didn't think we land, because we couldn't go further, and packed everything on motorbikes and drove then the remaining 150 kilometers, some material on the motorbikes. We also found a car in the village, and the funny thing about that car is the car lacked a wheel, and we found 3 villages down the road a wheel, and I just wondered why these two things didn't come together while we are in our absence. Anyway, so once we put the wheel on the car, also we had a car that helped us drive, and it took us about 4 days for these 150 kilometers. That's kind of the more like liquid nitrogen and some more other material in there. And it was Yeah, I think it was a once. I don't would like to repeat that core drive for many reasons. Yes, and then when we came to Kokolopori, this is a community reserve. We had to talk to the community and ask permission to enter their forest. Do you see it? Does it work? Eduardo, I only see you. Can you hear something?
Yes, we can hear the volume. Yep, you're okay.
I don't see it on my side. Okay. And then
now it paused.
Okay. And then we kind of, started finding a place in the forest where we could set up our camp to get to discuss with the population where they would like to have us, and they helped us setting things up. In the big time, we had to cut 2-3 big trees for security, but it all happened, and I think, as you can see now, this is from Google Earth, you can see here, this is basically our camp, the Lonua camp, which is, and here you see the fields of the nearby villages. And what is interesting about that place, is here we see the road, here again you see camp, that there are 4 bonobo communities who range in very close proximity of our camp. They're also very close to the villages. They stay close to these villages because there are some taboos on bonobo hunting. And we have these 4 communities. Tekako is interesting because, first of all, they're all rather small. I think overall we come to an understanding that the bonobo communities are not so large as we initially thought. And they have very, very varying sex ratios. More males in the small Tekako community, and then substantially more females in a larger community. And the interesting thing here is that these different groups, they spend substantial times of the year together. So you see here over the course of maybe 1.5 years, you see here how much the percentage of time different groups spend together. And there are months where the 2 or more groups spend more than 70% of the time together. So they can hang out for a couple of hours. It can be very aggressive, but it can also last for up to several weeks that they are together, which was very different from Louis Cotal, where the groups spend a lot of time, much more time apart. And I would like to share with you, just how does that look in the forest when 2 groups come together. 2 groups coming together and walking towards the. Okay, so there is a lot of excitement in the beginning, that it can be aggression, the things can be aggressive, but nevertheless, people very early on said, how can you be sure that they're different groups? No, we know from chimpanzees, they have these neighborhoods, which can be very distinct clusters within their communities. And so now, last year, together with my postdoc, Liron Samuni, we kind of analyzed the data over a longer time frame, and what we basically found is that the population of Kokolopori, they have these very distinct clusters, which you know, that these groups are robust and distinct clusters, and also that these members of a given cluster, they share spatially distinct home ranges. So it looks that it's much clearer than delineated than we see that in very large chimpanzee communities, giving some strong support that we actually look at different groups. And I will add some more evidence for that. And one of them being kind of, if you look at the home ranges, so we see in dark the home range of Coqualongo, the 95% kernel, and in red the 50% kernel. You see here in white the color home range, and in yellow the 50% kernel. You see there is substantial overlap. You see there are kind of, there are certain parts which are exclusive of the home range, at least if we compare just these two communities, but also kind of from the very core, as even the cores of the home range, they kind of overlap between two groups. Now, one of the early field assistants, Franziska Wechtel, she kind of observed, that, hey, these bonobos, they're hunting very different animals. And we started to systematically write down, the hunting place and the hunting, the prey species. And, you see on this map here, the symbols, the squares, they're basically hunting locations for flying squirrels. The round dots here, they're the hunting locations for duikers. And the triangles, they're the hunting locations for squirrels. And what is kind of, you see that a lot of the hunts basically happen in the overlapping area. And what turned out, what we then again looked in a more detailed analysis is kind of what we found is that two different groups, they kind of have group specific hunting behavior. If you look at the prey species, right, we see that actually a color, they mainly feed on these flying squirrels if they hunt, whereas Coqualongo, they have a large part of duiker and also other squirrel hunting, which is kind of interesting, no? Because if we kind of struggled for a long time to basically, in kind of proving some evidence for animal culture in the wild, because if in chimpanzees where the home ranges are not overlapping and we see them doing things in a different way, we always struggle to kind of exclude the ecology, for being actually causing the differences that we see. Now, in bonobos, the neat thing is here, these two groups share the exact same ecology, but nevertheless, we see these group specific hunting behavior, which, provides, I think, very strong evidence for the existence of some cultural traits as well in this species. Then there are further indications, that the individuals differentiate group membership, and the individuals seem to react differently to the presence of members of other groups. We have here, if we just for the left and the right, we see the residuals of urinary cortisol and in the presence of out-group members. So on the left, if they're just within members of the same group, and if they're with members of other groups, kind of cortisol level increase. So we kind of, there is indication of several levels that these social units, they are really separated social groups, which now makes it always interesting to see, like, when do they come together? What brings these groups together? And we do not have a definite answer yet on what brings them together. What we see is kind of, if you look at the influence of the ecology, we see again in purple the time that they spend together during a given month, and in red you see the monthly food abundance, which basically just integrates the food available in the habitat. We see that they're more like they spend more time together when there is a lot of food in the environment. So the ecology seems to have a facilitating role in bringing them together. Now, let me show you a second video. This is kind of when they come together, in the beginning, there's a lot of excitement, but then as a naive observer, within 2-3 days of them being together, we'll have a very hard time to tease apart group membership during these encounters. And what you see, they interact, they groom also with each other. So we have here members of the of the smaller group. Here we have members of two different groups grooming. We see a male of a color, a young female from Kokolongo, which just, approaches him and they will head off grooming. So there is a lot of social positive and also cooperative behavior that happens actually between two groups. Now that is, and to me that's kind of like, oh wow, now we see this kind of cooperation between members of different groups. I mean, there have been some anecdotal evidence of these intergroup cooperation in bonobos, but we have it now here on a really regular level, allowing us to really go deeper into what are mechanisms of cooperation across borders. So we can, for example, look at grooming network, right? And we see here in this, I don't know how you call this color, kind of like, never mind. Salmon color is a color, and then you have here in gray Kokolongo, and what you see is kind of, the grooming interactions that happen in blue is between members of different groups. So we have, up to 400 grooming events that happen between members of different groups over the course of 2 years. Now, it's not only in grooming, we see that, members of different groups, they form coalitions. Also, we observed nearly 90 coalitions formed by members of different groups. Interesting, if you look at it, you see, the circles are female. So female, at least in this form of cooperation, seem to have a very prominent role. So it's mainly between females of different group. But we also see cooperation in the form of food sharing. So we have, members of different group sharing food with each other, and food sharing is interesting because it entails, a much higher defection risk compared to grooming or coalition formation. For coalition formation, I think we can explain somehow through mutualism in bonobos. Grooming is often reciprocated on a very short time frame. But here, food sharing interaction opportunities are uncertain, and these are kind of these. So we are just right now in the process also to looking a little bit more into, okay, who are the ones, who particularly cooperate between what are the individual characteristics of those cooperators between groups. And, initial analysis seem to indicate that it's, the high cooperators within group, they assort, we have this positive assortment of high cooperators also between groups, allowing for cooperation to occur across group boundaries. Yeah, and I think with that, I just want to come back to the overview, because I feel like given these new data from bonobos, they kind of really offer a valuable alternative scenario, in which kind of cooperation emerges or ties between different groups are formed in the absence of exogamy or strong, bilateral kin recognition. And as such, it might be worth, either considering an ancestral stage of human between group cooperation that is, that includes a bonobo-like social system in which tolerance towards outgroup members could facilitate cooperation, and emergence of cooperation in the absence of very strong genetic ties. And, and we may also can just use the bonobo intergroup relationships as an example for a homoplasy for further explore, what basically shifts, what leads to these potential shifts in between group cooperation. And I think overall that the findings from our group in bonobos and also from findings of these comparative studies in the wild really help us to pinpoint down species and population characteristics in an ecological and social relevant context. And I think that to me is very relevant if we want to understand potential selective pressures, resulting in homolog or analog traits in humans. And I think with that, I'm at the end of my talk. I would kind of like to thank you for your attention. I would, like the former Department of Primatology and my collaborators for all their help, specifically Leonard in the field without whose help and always support the whole new field site wouldn't exist. Gottfried Hohmann, my former PhD supervisor, Tobias Deschner and Roman Wittig for all their support in setting the things up, and my research group in Harvard for being so nice. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for the invitation. I guess I'll stop sharing here.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, for the wonderful presentation. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. For those of you who are maybe joining us for the first time, let me remind you that what I asked that you do is just type a question mark in the chatting window, and I'll be calling on those who want to ask Martin a question in the order that you post your question mark. I may take the liberty of skipping you if you've already asked a question before meeting today, and we try to give priority to our younger colleagues, students, postdocs. So we really continue working on building this wonderful community where everyone feels comfortable sharing a thought or asking a question. So having said that, I will also, of course, take questions from the participants who are watching this live via YouTube channel of the Frontiers program. So if Adriana, you can help me keeping an eye on whether we have any questions from YouTube, I'll be sure to bring them up to everyone. So with that, I would like to invite questions for Martin, and I see, please, let's, even when you feel like everyone knows you, because like, for example, our first question is going to come from a regular participant, fine. Out of respect to those who may be joining us for the first time, please introduce yourself, state your name and your affiliation before asking your question. So for the first question, Clara.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm Clara B. Jones. I'm just curious about the very interesting finding that the groups feed on different meat sources, ungulates and then the squirrel-type rodent. Why don't you, instead of interpreting this as culture, why don't you interpret this within an ecological context and see this as niche differentiation to reduce competition?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And I mean, we thought about that as well. I think my initial answer would be these hunts are not so regular, right? We kind of compiled what you saw is kind of the hunt that occurred during about 5 years. So it's not, and just to me, it doesn't seem that, these squirrels or these duikers would be very restrictive resources in those environments, which would kind of lead to some sort of which would favor a differentiation of different niches because it's so abundant as a resource, if that makes sense, given how often it's harvested.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Just one more comment, that you do find what you're calling cooperation around plant resources. I assume that's either leaves or fruit, and leaves would be evenly distributed and probably not rare, and then fruit would be clumped, both of which might lead to the coordination of groups in space and time, whereas those mammals that you show, which are targets of nutrients, would be dispersed in space and time. Is that accurate?
I have to admit, I'm not such a strong squirrel biologist. I kind of would not. We would have to really inventorize the squirrel abundance of the species that are eaten in the region to say something about the dispersal of the prey species, right? I think it is my, I can only talk about gut feeling. I think these duikers, they are very evenly distributed across, large parts of the forest. You saw also the habitat is quite uniform that we see. There's one river crossing it, but it's not, it's not a habitat that is very diverse. So intuitively you wouldn't think about very strong kind of ecological niches being a driver of abundances of prey species.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Please, one more. Remember to introduce yourself and share your affiliation. The next question is from Severin Hex.
Hi, thank you for a really interesting talk. My name is Severine. I'm a PhD candidate at Princeton University, and I had a question about what you mentioned regarding the intergroup affiliation, grooming, food sharing, etc. I was wondering if you could tell me or tell us a little bit more about that and to what extent you think kinship between the females, between groups might be driving these affiliations.
Yeah, good, very good question. Thanks, Evelyn. So at that point, I think we know from in terms of kinship, we can define, genetically, we can basically narrow that down to mother offspring, and full siblings. It gets trickier if you want to kind of differentiate half siblings reliably with the genetic markers that we currently use. We use microsatellite is kind of what we use, and what we can see is kind of do we see many mother-daughter pairs in neighboring communities? We do not see those, so if we would assume that maybe the daughters, they just basically transfer to the neighboring community, I think we have one disputed case where that might be true. So these very close mother-daughter relationships, they're not driving the picture. So they are not, they're not the ones who connect between these communities. We cannot clearly exclude the possibilities that they're maternal sisters, who share a mother who is no longer present. So we cannot exclude that. I think we have many of these immigrant females who go through they show up on a day in one community. We see how they move between the communities, and then they move out again of these 4 communities. And it's, from while we are there, I think about 5 females settled, and none of them is just from a neighboring community. So that's all the evidence we have against the idea that, it's clearly these very close kinship ties between the communities that drive this cooperation. But 100% exclude, we would have to do more in detail genetic analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Charlotte Hemelrijk from the University of Groningen. And thank you for a very nice, interesting talk. Very interesting, very difficult to study these bonobos. And I was interested in what you said about the lower share of paternity in larger communities with more males, because I kind of was then a bit confused, because I thought, shouldn't you look at the percentage of males rather than the number of males? Because if you have a higher percentage of males, there's more competition rather than number.
Yeah, I think let me try to what I meant, and maybe there are other ways to exemplify that, but it's my understanding, if you have a system in which, basically males can form coalitions, and basically, the access to females is contested, I kind of assume, that the more males they are, the more difficult it will be for a single male to defend access to a given female.
But it depends rather on the percentage than on the. You understand? Because if you have a higher number of males but also a higher number of females, that's a very different thing.
Yes, I think, okay, so strictly speaking, we would have to look at how many females are in estrus, so it's not the number of females, so we really would have to look at the number of fertile females during a given moment in time. And we know, from this system, we can maybe have, at least in these groups where I looked at, we have 2 or 3, which is always lower than the number of potential males. So it's kind of, whether if we only look at 3 females at the given time that are potentially fertile, right? Whether it's 9 or 20 males, I think it's really then about the number of the males in this.
So the number of males varies much more than the number of females. It's only 2 or 3. Yeah, okay, that's different. Yeah, then I understand. Thanks.
I'm coming next. Eduardo Franz Duque, Yale University. Martin, can you give us a brief recap summary of the knowledge there is on female dispersal, both on chimps and bonobos? Because in part for me is because I'm really working now on dispersal issues, but sometimes because it's so hard to learn, it goes undescribed or fully undescribed. For those of us a little bit outside these systems, we may be under the wrong impression of what is really known, not just for the bonobos, but for the chimps. So a synopsis of what's the situation with the knowledge there is on where these females are coming from, where they're going, because it seems I'm under the impression that it's a big unknown.
So yes, so maybe more people know more, in the audience, but it's my understanding that, in the females, in both of the species, most of the female migrate out before they reach maturity in chimpanzees and bonobos. In both species, some, that's not every female goes out, right? Some females, they stay in the natal group. And I think, in Conjevara, it's maybe 20, I think 5, I don't know the percentage. I think the highest percentage is in Gombe, for example, in this Casacela group, because we lack kind of, you can imagine that it depends on whether there are neighboring groups around, right? So in places where there are kind of very little, very few groups and basically only human habitat around, you won't see much of a larger proportion of the females will remain in their natal community. That's one thing. The other thing, the problem to study female migration is obviously that we habituate 1 or 2 groups, right? We do not have so many groups that would allow us really to trace back, where do they end up in the end. So to where they migrate, that's more difficult. It seems that the age at which they migrate is lower in bonobos. So there's some indication, 7, 8 years of old are the females when they leave their natal community. That seems to be later in chimpanzees. It seems to be the case that in bonobos, those females, they just hop between different communities. We see them coming in, they stay 2-3 weeks in one community. They use those peaceful intergroup encounters, or these tolerant intergroup encounter, I think is more relevant, to hop between groups, so they really visit different groups, go forward and backward, till at one point they settle down. And this is just, I think for us, it's 4 cases, but for each of those females, we do not know what their original community is, and it lays outside our study.
Okay. So it is as remarkable as I thought. So the truth, because of course we are all familiar with the reviews on the life history of chimps here and there, females and males. The truth is, you just said it, for you, at the most you have 4 females that you know where they come from. So which means that we probably have very, very few complete life histories of any single female chimp or bonobo ever anywhere.
Yeah, I think the only exceptions would be places, when they either remain in their natal community, then you obviously know when they're born and can follow them better. Or if you kind of have a Gombe scenario where you have 2 neighboring communities, which basically are all the communities that are left, to my understanding, where you would just see, and both are habituated. So a scenario like that, there you would also be able to study that a bit more in more detail.
Thank you. Next question, Michael.
Yes, I'm Michael Dabrowski from University of Bern, currently at Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin. I would be interested in what you mentioned about the cooperation between members of different groups. You mentioned 3 different contexts: coalition formation, food sharing, and other grooming. And I wonder whether there is any evidence for kind of expensive or costly cooperation, like provisioning of food to a partner from a different group, and whether if such more expensive cooperation occurs, you have any evidence that this is reciprocated between members of different groups?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. I think so. You referred to provisioning of food. No, that's what I call food sharing. No, and the food sharing is just it's a one-way thing, and we can look at these about 40 cases we have, and we see very little of them being reciprocated. You know, so it's not, you know, that's kind of at the moment. I think it's less than 10% that is basically reciprocated of these food sharing events. Maybe we don't look at enough time, you know, to look at that, but still, I think we look over 2 years, and it's hard to imagine, you know, that it's this short-term reciprocation that really would maintain the system. I don't know, you know, go maybe that. I think that's a very interesting discussion, and I think for my understanding at that point, you know, and that might be often and maybe also a bit naive, is kind of, you know, you maybe have within group mechanisms that select for these type of prosocial behavior within group, right? And what we see then happening between groups is just the tendencies that pay off within groups, you know, you still see them occurring between groups, which would go along with the idea that it's basically these strong within group cooperators that also, you know, do that in between group context.
So do you see a reciprocation within groups?
Yes, within group we see, I mean, we see, you know, we see a stronger reciprocation within group. We can look at, you know, how much, you know, the sharing out degree, how much an individual shares with other, how does that kind of it's correlational, you know, how does that correlate with what an individual gets? And we see a very strong correlation between in-group and sharing towards sharing away and getting food, basically. Within a group, it's much less, so this correlation is much weaker between groups.
Of course, I mean, reciprocation may also involve different commodities. It's not necessary that if you spend food that you get food back. It may also be that you are then auto-groomed or benefit from a coalition or something like that. So even if you look across currencies, you don't find strong evidence that there is reciprocation between those members of different groups.
Yeah, I think, you know, in this species, we know, you know, that they can share also different commodities. I just feel like, you know, if you look at the actual happening, you know, grooming is in bonobos is very reciprocated during one given turn. No? So you have these constant switching forward and backward. It's less like, you know, I provide you grooming this time, and maybe another time you provide me. There's much more of these very short-term reciprocation already happening there. And it's which is very different from the food sharing.
Thank you.
Next question, Eleanor Crooks.
I think, sorry, Sarah also kind of has a question, has her hands up since a long time. And I think you.
Oh, okay, Sarah, you raised your question and I'm keeping an eye on the chatting for the question mark. I have you here. Okay, so let's take Eleanor and then we'll go to Sarah. I apologize, Sarah. I'm just looking at the chatting window for the question marks. Eleanor, you go first, then Sarah follows.
Hi, I'm a recent graduate from University of Derby, Eleanor Crooks. I found your talk really interesting. I had two questions. One of them was about dispersal, which just because that's what I'm interested in, but you sort of went into that a bit more with Eduardo. But my second question was these cooperators that cooperate more within groups, then cooperate more with like outside groups. Have they got any similarities in like age or sex, like that makes them more cooperative in groups? Like, is there any age or sex that you can see? I don't know if that might be coming later with more data and stuff like that, but it's just, I can't get my head around like that. They're just it seems so unselfish the way that they're doing stuff like this. And I didn't know if there was anything like the younger ones are a bit more wary of outsiders or anything like that. But yeah.
So we don't see a sex effect, you know. I think, you know, if we statistically look at it, I think in general, I would think it's more females who do that. I think, you know, females definitely in other contexts cooperate, you know, like in forming coalitions, they are more doing, you know, they're forming more coalitions with members of other groups than male do. There might be a small bias towards female, but that doesn't, you know, is not, doesn't in analysis doesn't show up. The age, it's more older individuals, so it's adult individuals. It's not that these young individuals, you know, they maybe also never are even in the position to really monopolize the food that then can be shared, you know. So it's kind of, I think it's also it's more older. It's a tendency maybe a bit more to females, but I think the strongest indicative is really how much they share within group. No, that's kind of what really seems to set them apart. And what I'm kind of still wondering is, you know, how the heck do they know which of the other groups are those? No, how do they know that about? How do they get these informations of the other groups? How do they recognize these cooperators in other groups? With them. So
that's what I was thinking. I was like, is there any sort of,
we're kind of you know, we're still trying to. Yeah,
no, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, that's just, you know, it's all work in progress.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Sarah, thanks that I missed you. You're next.
Right. Thank you, Martin. I love the way you're expanding our horizons to consider alternative models for intergroup relations in human art. I love that part. This is a tangential comment on the point about some bonobo groups specializing in certain prey. And just in case this is something you want to follow up on and is of interest, dimly in my memory from way back, there's some really potentially interesting ethnographic and archaeological parallels for you. There's Mary Steiner's work, who did the archaeology of foragers in late Pleistocene Italy. And she was using prey specialization as a way to monitor population densities building up, going back to Clara's point. And she was showing that it really was, people would quit using mammals and use more tortoises as the prey kind of gets overexploited. So that's one parallel, and it's to Clara's point. But there's another parallel that's really intriguing, and I'm sorry I cannot remember the references, but it's the work of Catherine Milton. Do you remember her very pioneering work on primate nutrition? In her late stages, she moved to studying human nutrition and human foragers in Amazonian people. And she was finding very much what you described of some groups specializing in certain prey animals and having taboos against the use of others. And I wish I could provide you the reference, but I know it's out there. I'm not sure she's the first author. I just checked on Google Scholar and couldn't find it under her name.
Thank you very much. I just wrote everything down. I don't know what I can.
Yeah.
But I could. Yeah. That's.
Well, no, anyway, that was fascinating. Thank you.
I don't feel like you know. I don't think that the hunting pressure by bonobos on those prey species is really substantial. Right?
No, I would agree.
I think that's the only thing that makes me kind of hesitant about these niche differentiation, right? And maybe see, you know, I think if you follow that a little bit more over time, and there might be shifts, you know, which can be telling about that, right?
That's why the Milton example is so telling, because she was actually looking and ruling out the ecological argument. So it was a cultural argument in her case.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will look these things up.
We have a question now from Orion Strayer. I hope that I pronounced your name well.
Yes. Hello, I am Orion Strayer. I'm an undergraduate student at Washington University in St. Louis. And I had a question about male-male interactions within these groups. And so there tends to be like female dispersal in both chimpanzees and bonobos, which would tend to lead to more family ties between males within each of the groups. Are there any significant differences between chimpanzees and bonobos in terms of the male-male relationships?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, there definitely are. I think, so first thing, I mean, you're right. We would, is a male philopatric species, male remain in the natal community. We would therefore assume that males might be more closely related between each other than the females, which I think some studies found, but not as clear as we would have thought. But we definitely see strong differences. So in chimpanzees, these males, they defend a common territory, and they kind of evolve in a lot of these kind of large scale is maybe wrong, but these group level cooperation, right? And that is a behavior that seems to be completely absent in bonobos. We males do not form, in this context, these prominent coalitions that chimpanzee males do. Now, also, if you look at the competition between males within group, it seems that in chimpanzees, male can form coalitions. They form coalitions to attain a higher rank. Coalitions and social bonds between males seem to be a very crucial aspect in a chimpanzee male's maneuvering, his reproductive career, which just really doesn't seem to be the case for bonobos from what we can tell so far. Bonobo, they have somehow differentiated relationship with other males, but that would not really manifest in supporting each, go as far as supporting each other. That might, or other things. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, and very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Orion. Next question, Adriana.
Yeah. Hi, Martin. Thank you for such a great talk. And I'm Adriana Maldonado, Universidad de Rosario in Colombia. I have two questions. One, it's a little bit more conceptual, just double checking, and then the other one, it's a little bit more open. So the first one relates to grooming. You said that you use grooming as a measure of cooperation. How can you use that, or how did you define grooming so it can be taken as a cooperative behavior? That's the first one. And then I don't know if you want the second one right straight away or after.
I tried to write it down. You could say the second one as well, and then I take the second one.
Okay. And then the second one is related to the ranking. So you were saying that low-ranking males, males with moms, they get better reproductive success, but that goes especially for low-ranking males. My question relates to the moms. Do the moms have higher ranking, and so they sort of protect the low-ranking males from not getting this access, or are they also low-ranking and somehow that's a way to kind of increase the ranking of their sons?
Okay.
So yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So I actually would like to answer the second one first. That's easier. No, I start with the first one. The first one, grooming, why do I think grooming is a cooperative act, right? And I would kind of, we assume allogrooming is an investment of it helps to remove parasites on the skin for the other. So it's a service, right? That is provided to another individual. On that level, it's time and investment for another with benefits to another individual. So it's kind of some, and that can be also reciprocated from the other individual. And so far, it has the characteristics of a cooperative relationship, right? Because it can be. And the other thing is, where maybe you're coming from is that, grooming another individual might also be very selfish, right? In a way that, we know that, for example, we know for chimpanzees that when they groom with a close partner, there seem to be some, if we measure oxytocin increase during the grooming bouts, we see that they seem to have if they groom with close friends, that obviously gives something, there is some reward even to the individual that grooms, on on a physiological level. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that the last part makes it more weird then, but I think just what I want to say, I think we look at it because it's a time investment into another individual that can also be reciprocated. Now your second question about, you know, how, so just to precise, so mothers seem to influence the mating success and not the reproductive success from these mid and low ranking males. So mid and low ranking males, they kind of have a higher mating success if their mom is around. And so there is something that can be said to high ranking mothers being more efficient in providing help. You know, we know that in Womba and other bonobo study community, when there was a rank change between the females, you know, which is very rare to really observe, what was then consequently happening is also that there was a rank change between the males, you know, which indicate, you know, that a higher ranking mother is obviously better than a lower ranking mother, you know, for male rank. So the kind of male rank is somehow attributable to female ranks. The other thing is kind of, I think what we still don't really understand is the mechanism by which the mothers really support their sons. You know, my story about the female intervening, that's, you know, that these are occasional observations, you know, which kind of hinted at, hey, these mothers play a role. But is it really that these agonistic interventions of the mother are this really is this really the mechanism by which the moms help their son to attain more mating and more reproductive success? I'm not sure. You know, the role of the mom might be also a much more passive one. You know, the females in bonobo societies, they have very central position in the group, right? And so having a mom for a male basically is kind of like a social pass, is something that allows the males to hang out in the center of these social groups. And just being in the center, being at the feeding trees, you know, when a lot of tensions and copulation happen, you know, might just be the main way, you know, by which moms basically facilitate their sons having a higher mating success and reproduction. So it's maybe not the, you know, these very, I fight for my son, you know, type of thing. It's more kind of my son can hang out with me, you know, wherever I hang out, and he benefits from that.
Great. Thank you, Martin.
I come next, but I want to be sure that we don't have any of our colleagues joining us through the live YouTube channel if we have any questions there. And does anybody have a question now? I'd like to take questions from those who haven't asked yet. If not, I'm ready with one, but anyone who wants to jump in? Okay, then I'll go with one that, Martin, you and I have been talking. I feel comfortable asking this question or making this comment because we share an interest and a concern for data and data quality. I hope you don't mind that I share with the audience. You were telling me how you were surprised at having somebody make a comment to you that maybe you were sticking too close to your data, but it was not a comment that was meant to be positive, but it was more like maybe you shouldn't be so close to your data. You and I feel like we do need to be close to our data. I'm curious, the question has to do with the comparison of studies across decades and areas, and in this case, chimps and bonobos. Just to illustrate what I'm getting at, this has to do with intergroup encounters. There's this wonderful student from Germany, Leonie Gussone. She's just finished her master's thesis. She's studying her PhD at UC Santa Barbara. And she explored the data on intergroup encounters for peer-living primates. She started with 1,500 citations that in some way or the other refer to IGEs, intergroup encounters in peer-living taxa. By the time she started really looking at ruling out considerations for considering those data, she ended up with 65 papers that she read fully and ended up with 13 that had a definition of intergroup encounter and any kind of raw data that one can look at. So the question to you is, as you really launch all this, and you were telling me about these amazing projects you're planning, for any of these comparisons, have people first ruled out very basic explanations in terms of differences across decades, forest, observers, definitions? Because I know it's not a lot of fun, right? It's more fun to entertain all these theoretically driven hypotheses. But if you're planning another 40 years, shouldn't we just go back to the cheap studies from the 80s and see if we're comparing really apples and oranges, or those results can't be compared in the first place?
Yeah, I think is a good question. There's still a very limited amount of people who basically spend considerable time in the field with chimpanzees and bonobos, who would basically give an observer, that we would keep some observer reliability, right, to start with. And I think what we see that, I mean, I cannot speak for chimpanzees and bonobos, and I think, they have been, in my eyes, an overt interest in male relationships in chimpanzees for a long time, which just really, really kind of, basically men are kind of relevant for our evolution, or we became human because of the man, right? And then, I think how, looking at Christoph's old things, I don't want to point out individuals, but I think that there is definitely a strong observer bias to observe certain things in the wild. We don't film things. We it's one person who writes things down that a person sees, right? That's how the counting is done. So obviously there is a huge, methodological subjectivity in where they look and how they do things. And I think by kind of trying to bring between the pens, bringing people to both species and see what they, with the same emphasis where they look and things like that, that I think will hopefully help us to get a bit more clarity on proposed differences. I think there's a lot of differences, proposed differences, where by now we start realizing, hey, coalition formation among female chimpanzees, it's really a thing. Nobody ever talked about that. Hey, but it happens everywhere. If you just stick to the females, and which maybe are a little bit less social, right? And if you have then, and before it was kind of, it's just the difference between different subspecies. But I think the more and more we really push for having, focal data taken in the exact same way, and I think this is about to come now, that I think is exciting, that we get now focal data from different sites. And in many things, it's like, we wouldn't have thought that, it just shows how, I don't know, it's kind of an example. I just give an example. Keep that for yourself. We have a lot in chimpanzees. Carnivora is a community where a lot of aggression has been studied, right? And an emphasis on male aggression. Now we compare actual aggression rates between carnivora, between Western chimpanzees and between bonobos. It turns out this chimpanzee population is the one with the least aggression frequency of all, right? Even less than bonobos. Who would have thought, And it's just interesting to see. It's a newer picture, a fresh picture that kind of emerges if we really use the same methods at different sites.
Unless there's another question, there isn't. So you just, by mentioning female coalitions, you really gave me the opportunity to ask you, since there's another question, something that goes along the lines of, okay, we have female coalitions. If I asked you, put together a 10-minute lecture on male choice, so what could you say about males choosing? Again, we never talk about male choice. So anything to share that you think, either ways of exploring it or anecdotes or things that you maybe think about male choice?
I was just about to think a complete different direction. I have to read.
Go, take your, no, you go whatever direction you want to go.
Really.
Sarah,
do you have something that would speak to that? I think, one thing with the female coalitions I would like to finish, right? And I think it just becomes interesting now because we can now really compare the forms of female coalitions. I think that's probably what I think will be different. We have species difference, and the species difference is not that the females do something not in one or the other. I think what becomes interesting if we see that they do it in a different way. And I think these, that is kind of then what to me will be interesting, right, to look at.
So Sarah, you wanted to add something? We can start opening. Really, please feel free to jump in and have the dialogue.
You're muted, Sarah. You're muted.
You're muted.
I was just going to point you to Gene Altman's classic early essay that includes female mate choice in Patty Gawadi's Evolutionary Biology and Feminism. And, you know, the history of pointing out the point that Martin just made so beautifully, that goes back to Darwin. I mean, it goes back to the 19th century. The point is, those women were just erased from history. Those points were being made by Antoinette Brown Blackwell and George Eliot, a lot of people. Anyway, it's the point is now people are more aware of it, but really, Eduardo, the point is, and the point is that eminent male biologists are now aware of it. Just saying.
No, and I think I just the implication it has to compare, you know, studies that have been done 20 years ago and include that in a thing might, you know, one just has to be aware of that, right? And I feel like these comparative studies that I, you know, try to do, it really becomes then finding the oh, and again, this is a word in English, the common denominator, is that the word? So the methods become very broad, right? And where you just feel like, okay, to what degree do we think we have an objective measurement in all these studies that we kind of trust, right? Yeah. To reflect that. And if we just look at coalition formation, if we look at these ad libitum data of how often coalitions occur and things like that, that is, I don't, that's probably not the best data to look at, right?
Yep.
Do we have any other comments or questions? You may remember that I said that we are going to stop 12:45 because we want to give Martin a break before he has to go teach. Any other questions from the audience right now?
I have a comment.
Go, Karen.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Go
Clara.
ahead. That's
1 second, Eduardo. There is Julia. She has a question and she's a new member in the community.
yes, definitely.
And then we go with you, Clara. Sorry, the interruption.
Thank you.
Adriana, is Julia.
Julia.
Adriana, is Julia from?
Hi.
Hi.
I don't. Oh, Julia, but I didn't see the question mark. Sorry, but I can.
Oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Julia.
yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, much more basic question. Oh, sorry. I'm Julia Whalen, recent master's graduate from University College London. Much more basic question. I'm much more familiar with how rank is determined in chimps. Like a lot of the time it's based off of pant grunt interactions and stuff. And I wasn't sure, I was just curious how you determine rank in bonobos and if it's a similar vocalization interaction or anything like that, more based on grooming or how you decide that.
Good. Yeah, it's a good one. I think what we use is kind of we lack these, you know, formal signs of dominance, you know, in chimpanzees that are so prevalent in chimpanzees. They're not so prevalent in bonobos. We just, you know, they exist. It's not, you know, they're there, but they're just basically useless to use as dominance marker because they're just not reliably, you know, they're not reliably used. They're reliably used, but they're not often used. And so what we use is fleeing upon aggression. So we kind of take, you know, fleeing upon aggression as a behavioral marker, you know, the outcome of aggression, because that, you know, there were some evaluation studies in captivity who showed the consistency of this measurement, and so that's what we use to calculate dominance in bonobos. It's
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Working
yeah, that's
with what we have.
Yeah. No, it's I've been doing a bit more reading on how rank is determined and the new ways people are going about that, and so it's very interesting, especially because there are such huge differences between species, even such closely related species like the two pan species. But great talk, thank you. very interesting.
Thank you very much for the question. So just for to talk about the pant grunt, right, in bonobos. So it exists in bonobos. We have it in Cotal. There seem to be quite some population differences. In some population we have it, in others not. In some population it's so in Cocolopori we don't have it among the adults. We have it in juvenile, but we have it in infants. So it somehow, you know, it's somehow there. The question, I think there seems just to be more flexibility in when it's used or not somehow, you know. I think it is very interesting, and I think that just again, you know, this black and white, one of us don't have it, James have it, is not true. It's more fine graded.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting too because I just recently wrapped up a field season at Isa Valley in Tanzania, and so much more recently habituated than a lot of the big chimpanzee field sites. And I, had read so much about the pant grunt, and then I just didn't see much of it. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I won't be doing a big focus on rank because this is my first time doing this. I'm not sure how I would approach that. So it's interesting to see, maybe different strategies for rank could be used at even different chimpanzee communities.
Yeah, good idea. Looking forward to hear more about it.
Yeah.
So why don't we take? So I
Clara.
have Clara, right? Why don't we
Yeah.
take Clara, and then we'll probably stop there, unless I see here Sarah has a comment. I don't know where that comes after Clara, but Clara, you go first.
Yeah, I have a comment. First of all, Adriana, thank you for letting Julia go first. That was very sensitive. I have a comment related again to the predator animal prey data. Even though you say it's rare, it's remarkable for two reasons. If you're thinking about mammal social organization, social evolution, first of all, it's remarkable because there's a type of specialization that you're finding in a mammal. And mammal traits are generally very generalized by consensus in the literature and also received wisdom. So I find that remarkable. Secondly, in terms of mammal social evolution, the grade of specialization itself is a very high grade of sociality. This is why we're so fascinated by the eusocial taxa, both in the social mole rats as well as in the social insects. In fact, what you have is a type of functional division of labor, which is one of the very highest grades of sociality, at least according to a major transitions model. So I encourage you not to dismiss the potential significance of those observations.
Good point.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just maybe some thoughts, a comment on your comment. I think what might also plays into it, so is what you need in order to be able to hunt, right? Because, and I didn't elaborate so much on that, but if they hunt dikers, the bonobos, that's a rather opportunistic hunting. You stumble over a diker, the one who has it basically takes it, and squirrels as well. You have these individuals kind of who grab somewhere in a hole or something like that and pull the squirrel out. For flying squirrels, it's more complicated because they can jump off and fly somewhere. So you need at least, what you see is kind of this group then spreads out a bit, and you have to be more aware of what the other does in order to be really able to catch such a thing, right? And So, it might be, that there are also just social differences between the group, in a certain way, which just makes this hunting opens this possibility in one group but not the others. Which obviously doesn't explain why they don't eat the duikers as well, but that would just explain the picture with the flying squirrels.
The observation of specialization in mammals is remarkable. I commend you on that data.
Thank you.
Well, I think that being 12:45, thank you, Clara. Thanks, everyone. We will allow Martin to go take a break. Doesn't mean that we cannot hang out a little bit longer. But Martin, thank you so much. I think that we all stayed for the whole time asking questions and exchanging ideas speaks clearly about the interest and how fascinating your presentation was to everyone. So thank you. I'm sure we will stay in touch. Go get ready for your students.
Thank you.
I'll write to you later.
Yeah, if some people hang out here, I might hang out another, 5 to 10 minutes. I think, I think it's very, very interesting to me. I think it would be a miss if people feel like it. But if not, then.
Yeah, I mean, at this time, I invite you all, just open your microphone. Let's do it. I mean, we were punctual as the German. Let's open the microphones and talk like Latin Americans. So without so many hand raised, just jump in and share. If you have anything that you want to ask or follow up, or actually it's fun to hear from some of you like Julia or Ryan. I apologize, but I think it's the first time. My apologies if you've been here before and I didn't notice, but it's fun to get to meet you some more. So if you want to talk some more, tell us what you're doing. Claudine? Yeah. Oh, Claudine, finally I'm seeing you. Okay. Julia?
Yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say, yeah, I usually tune in on YouTube. I don't come on the Zoom very often, but yeah, I've been attending the YouTube seminar for a bit now.
So I'm curious. I never checked the YouTube community. Why was that? And will this chance of joining us via Zoom will that change the likelihood that you may just join us in person, well, virtual person next time?
Yeah, no, it's nice. When I saw that Martin was talking, I knew I would probably have a question. So I was like, oh, I'll attend in person or on Zoom. So if I have a question, I'd be able to ask face to face. But yeah, I don't know.
Great. I mean, I'm glad you did. It'll make it easier next time to ask again. And Ryan, how about you?
Hello, I'm actually an architecture student, but I'm
an architecture student.
Yes, I'm very interested in biomimicry, well, in biology in general. So, but I'm taking a class where I'm attending seminars, and I was sent by my professor this link to attend the Zoom meeting, and I'm so glad I attended.
Architecture, that's interesting. Well, I think you may be the first architecture student joining us in fun. And Claudine learned about fine.
Okay, let me get closer.
In a very random way. You're in Costa Rica, right?
Yeah, I'm Argentinian. I work in conservation biology, especially on protected areas and invasive species. But I'm a frustrated ethologist. This is why I'm so passionate about your seminars.
Okay, well, bienvenida.
Gracias.
Mia or Maya, I apologize if I don't remember you. You were here before, but do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everyone. This is my first time in the seminar, so don't feel bad. And my name is Mia Sarkeesian. I'm a master's student at Central Washington University in the primate behavior department. And I recently got very interested in cooperation, not just like within a species, but starting to kind of look at like interspecies cooperation as well, and maybe kind of how maybe social learning could happen between maybe apes in the wild, and I don't know. It's kind of new interest to me, but long term, I kind of want to look at maybe how we can look at cooperation in terms of like a conservation standpoint, since we do have limited habitats for species. If we kind of look at things from like a holistic perspective, so with maybe monkey species, if you look at more than one species, or like gibbons and orangutans, and kind of how we can look at it from a larger perspective that way.
Great. Well, thanks for introducing yourself. I look forward to see you the following up the next meetings. I find the next one is going to be, actually, it's the first time that we're going to have a fine session open up by grad students and postdocs, and really, so we really hope that it will draw the interest of many of your peers, namely our junior colleagues. We hope people will find it very interesting. Yeah. Anything else that I didn't forget anyone? No. Sure. So, Martin, thank you so much. And my goodness, it was funny to hear you say that it was very romantic. I can totally see those are the kind of trips that you do once for 2 weeks trying to get to your field site. Maybe you'll do a second time. Who knows? Maybe you'll take your daughter. Maybe you'll be willing to do it again with your daughter. But it's not. You don't want to become the routine, right?
Yeah. And our daughter would have to be older, I think I kind of need us. That's for sure. But yeah, we have easier ways in, but more expensive ways, obviously. But
okay, so to our community, I'm gonna stop the streaming in YouTube. So thank you to our YouTube participants. We look forward to seeing you.